Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bobcat Esports From Nothing to Something. My name is Christopher Myers, and
my name is Ivy O'Shaughnessy.
And my name's Jeff Kuhn.
Cool. So I'd like to start out with the history of Bobcat Esports, just a kind of a brief overview of what we did to get started, and why the title's From Nothing to Something. During 2017, the College of Business held a Business and Games Summit, and I was also participating in Cluster and researching esports, and participated in kind of looking over the campus and realizing that we didn't really have anything there as far as esports was going on. And as someone who's very, very passionate about gaming and then also being recognized for your own personal achievements and that drive, I proposed creating an Overwatch and League of Legends team and unifying games on campus. I had a wonderful doodle of Rufus that nobody should ever see on our slides, but unfortunately we can't get that to show from the original proposal.
They were trying to protect us.
And I guess OU's protecting me for that one. But getting everyone together was probably the biggest challenge. We didn't have too many people at the time, and I had met Ivy, thankfully, through the Business and Games Summit, and we had a quick run-in with the Smash president at the time, who was Adam Midlaski, and he's now our program director. And we did a lot of running around and ideating between the different clubs. There were several different gaming clubs on campus, but none of them were esports focused, and we wanted to fill that gap. And we also realized that we could create a really good, strong community bond as Bobcats there. And so we kind of tossed around the idea of creating something called like the OUEC, which is the esports club, and that name didn't kind of stick with us, and we kind of tossed things around a little further, and we formed Bobcat Esports. The rough draft was a constitution that was pretty restrictive and didn't quite make sense to a lot of us in its original idea. From there, I actually got back in touch with Dana Kowar, and who I had met at the Business Games Summit, and she provided some great mentorship and discussions on us forming an organization. And we took that and then made a bunch of adjustments, and that formed what Bobcat Esports is today.
So I bet you're wondering, how does that pertain to you guys? You don't got to OU. That's a good question, audience. Thank you for asking that. So, within Ohio, if any of you noticed, a lot of the schools within Ohio now have these great esport programs. So OSU is like a key one. I'm sure we have all heard about like the great like program they're putting on. Kent State, Shawnee. Ohio is starting to become like one of the small states that is going to become a jumping point for esports as a whole. The fact that OU doesn't have one yet is just indicative that we are a little behind. And the whole point of Bobcat Esports is to help students who would be in a town where they don't normally have that, like get that. The way you guys can use that in your day-to-day life is we are essentially talking to people that don't know how to speak our language. You know, it's kind of if you do something you're really passionate about technology and you talk to your parent and they don't understand because they came from a different generation. It's the same thing. So it's all about how like you as students can like jump off the ground with that and how you can like talk to these like school administrators who like don't know what you're talking about, you know? It's hard to explain esports to somebody who did not grow up with video games. So.
Also, if there's any point in this conversation, it's a conversation, it's not just us presenting. Feel free to interrupt us and ask a question at any point in time. We strongly encourage it.
Yeah, so without further ado.
Jeff, if you could push one further.
Yeah, all right.
So the way we set this up essentially is a lot of the schools within Ohio, the way they do it is they have one department and then they have the department handle every club and manage every club within the department. The way we handle it, well, it is different because we're a student org, is we let each game be self-voluntary and they do on their own. So Overwatch, Rocket League, Smash, all of those clubs just work on their own and basically do their own thing, and Bobcat Esports is essentially an umbrella that helps them. So if they need support with funding, if they need support with like running something, talking to the school, we are there to provide it for them. But as a whole, the games under Bobcat Esports are on their own to do as they please. We simply provide a guiding hand if they ask for it.
It also acts as a great central communication hub for university discussions. And that's how we actually tied in and met with Jeff, was we were creating Bobcat Esports, and then Jeff managed to get in contact with us at the same time, wanting to do something very similar on campus. and it's acted as a great hub for information and dissemination of those plans and discussions. And I think, Jeff, if we want to go to the next one, actually, and a lot of great things have actually come out of the organizational structure. Hearthstone was one of the first things that actually came out of it as this foundational point in where we could actually help a team get started and get moving. Hearthstone actually just went in head full and took third nationals in TESPA that fall. The first semester they had actually gotten together. And I like to think that a little bit of the help that we were able to provide in terms of getting them set up and running and the leadership that they brought into the table through Tyler, and he was an absolutely excellent person, really pushed them into a great position, and that's why they were able to take it as far as they did.
So once Bobcat Esports took off, the clubs under us have just exploded. Like, I know it sounds kind of weird, but like these clubs went from like, what, I'd say like 10 15 people. 10, 15 members to, as far as our Discord goes, we have around 200 and...
Registered OU students.
Registered OU students we have.
400 total.
400 total within the Bobcat Esports umbrella. So this thing just took off. So we have some extremely active like Rocket League members. We have some CS members that are active in tournaments. Our 2 Overwatch teams are currently competing in TESPA and Open Division. The whole point here is not whether... You do want to be good to an extent, but the whole point is providing students with the ability to get good. I didn't mean to say it like that, but you know what I mean. And that's essentially what you want to foster. You want to foster ability for amateur players, so to say, to come together and to find a place to learn. With a couple of these schools, it can be really daunting to get onto like an organized team, because you already have players that are established and good, and you already have players that, have been doing this for a little bit. So, how do freshmen that might have never played like an esport before get in and like get into like the organized aspect of things? That's where we come in. We say you don't have to be good to start esports. You just have to be passionate and you have to be willing to let go. Along with that, we've also been working a lot with Ohio University. So the original starting point for Ohio University starting to consider us was Bobcat Esports. I consider it a great success that we've come this far, that they even like acknowledge us and they understand that we're a thing, So it's been a lot of translation, so to say, and we've made great leaping points with talking to these like higher up administration about what we're doing.
So, quick question. How many people are at a university with an esports program?
Nice.
Really? All right. Really, Chip? So, your schools, all right, high school, college?
I'm at Kent State.
Kent State?
Kent
So you've
State.
got a program. Yeah. How about everybody else? I see Ohio State jerseys.
Ohio State.
Ohio State.
Okay, who in the room plays a game that's considered an esport?
What do you
There
play?
you go, most people. There you go, yeah.
All right. Anybody else?
Okay, so the point is,
This is quiet.
I know.
Wow. All
the
right.
the scope of like people who play games considered esports is way, way bigger than I think people like that manage like these universities understand. Even the ones that already have programs, I don't think understand just how much of their student body are active within esports.
Yeah, and the reason I ask these questions about whether or not you are at a school with a program, whether or not you play competitively, to kind of give you a little bit of background into how Ohio University has been approaching this. So about the same time that Bobcat Esports started to develop, I was working on a project independently of Chris and Ivy here, and I said, the university needs an esports program. We're behind already, and we've got to get this up and running. The university really wasn't sure what that was. They had no idea kind of conceptually what competitive video gaming was. And at the same time, so I jumped in with Chris and Ivy. I was lucky enough to meet them and said, let's start putting this together. And from a kind of, as Ivy mentioned, a cultural translator perspective, I think that's what's really needed at universities is figuring out a way to start that discussion. Going with people who maybe had checked out of video games after Pong or Super Mario Brothers and getting them to understand it's a $100 billion a year industry, and esports within that is about $1 billion a year industry. So having that kind of conversation with them starts to be really where you've got to be able to navigate two worlds almost and start to bring those two worlds together. And that's where we've spent the majority of our time is thinking about how do we convey the enthusiasm, the excitement? How do we show our university that there is a student population out there who loves and is passionate about video games? Because, you know, one of the defining characteristics of video game players is we're often very behind the scenes. You know, you can play at home. You know, if you think about some of the traditional media literacies out there in the world, you know, if you're a fan of music, there's somewhere on campus for you to go. If there's, you know, if you're a film lover, there's someone on campus for you to go and be visible. Video games have never been visible on campus. And so they don't really think about it as a demographic that needs catered to. So that's been our biggest challenge. And that's where, you know, Chris and Ivy's organization has really come in well, where we can point and say, look, there are 300 kids on campus active. How do we build on that, right? So that's kind of the position where I'm coming in. And, you know, I think what I'd really like to hear you guys talk about a little bit more is this organizational structure. Because as you mentioned, if you've got 12 clubs on campus, that's a lot of people to talk to. And the university's going to have a real hard time doing that. So as I've started working with your club, I've talked to 3 people. So how did you decide on your structure?
So our structure was this constant toss-up at the start. We had several different discussions, and I think the one that stuck the most was talking to UGDA, which is our dev association. And they participate through a roundtable discussion and where every single person has the same level of authority as the next. And during our discussions, we kind of chose to adopt that structure similar. And out of that roundtable, we then elected 3, which are considered an executive board. And they don't operate on any different power level of authority, but they operate as direct contact with the university. So it allows a very direct approach to us for the university, but still keeps us all within our same group. And those that get elected to those 3 positions don't necessarily drop from their other positions. So in point of reference, I'm the VP of Overwatch. I helped Ivy start getting that team together.
Just for clarification, I'm the president of Overwatch.
Right.
Team for you.
So getting that together, we wanted it so that they weren't any bit separate from our own populace as students. We didn't want to take them away from being a president of, say, Rocket League and having that direct contact with that group of students, because every one of them is like their own subculture. Every group knows what they do best. They know their own people best, and they know how to operate within that own group best. So what the roundtable does is it just provides a central location to bring all of those, I guess, for lack of a better term anyway, best practices really for those teams to come to the table together and cohesively make those a bond and work together to even boost each other up. And some of the things that we've noticed out of that organizational structure and having that roundtable together and discuss as like this open discussion is that all these groups are able to share all these different ideas, and we're able to build off them routinely. We can take in one group's idea and say, hey, let's bring this together, and how can we implement this elsewhere? What else can we do with this? Where can we move forward as a whole, instead of just this is my club versus this is their club? And adopting like this we personality to our own organization has provided a really great benefit, not only for the students, but also for our organizations as well.
And where's that worked and where hasn't it worked?
So
because we've run into that.
Yeah, we have. So there's places where it's worked I think Rocket League is like one of the shining examples. They started with nobody, same with Hearthstone, and just came up and just ran with it. We've had other groups start and try to get running, and we weren't able to foster them as well as we could have, or we didn't have enough community members at the time to really support that group that they wanted to get running. So the hard part for us is ensuring that we have enough of an audience for those that come forward and say, hey, I want to start this. And that just has to do with us recruiting proper amounts of students, I believe.
It's hard too, because this industry is ever changing. When we talked about this at the Business of Games Summit at OU, they called it the Wild West. Esports is by no means like nearly at a basis level as like any of the other things we're interested in, like it's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. That can be hard for student clubs too. We've had a couple that, haven't been able to get off simply because where it's at within the industry, like wasn't at a point where it could even support a student club at university, you know? It's just we have to roll with the punches of how esports is evolving. And sometimes that can mean dropping off. It's hard because there's no standard in esports right now. Everything is up to the idea of who's running it. Yeah, so.
Yeah, and to give you a little bit of sense of that, one of the big issues right now, and if you're talking about negotiating with your university or even high school, thinking about how to get a team up and running, there is no de facto governing body at this point. A report by the Wasserman Media Group, they looked at whether or not students would be receptive to the notion of the NCAA being involved in esports, and the answer is absolutely not. Gamers have a very negative reputation, not necessarily unwarranted, that the NCAA is just a corrupt organization, and so they want nothing to do with it. So now suddenly it's this very Wild West mentality where everyone is sort of jockeying to create some sort of league that ends up being the governing system across the United States for collegiate esports. And we've got a few different organizations going on. Quick question, when was the first university esports team started up? Does anybody know off the top of their head? What year and where? No? Bueller? All right, no. It's 2014 in Robert Morris University. So as you can see, we're dealing with a 5-year time span at this point. So we've gone from one school in 2014 to over 200 of them in the 5-year time span. So we've seen this explosive growth across the country, but not necessarily any sort of cohesive organization. So we've seen things like TESPA come up. That has its pros and cons. We've seen a situation like the Pac-12 out west, where you had the collegiate body, very NCAA driven, try to create an esports league, and it largely fell apart because, well, the NCAA was involved. So this is kind of the other challenge that we have from a university perspective, is they want to frame everything in terms of athletics. And even more challenging, they tend to frame the discussion in terms of creating a brand new athletic team. And we're like, well, it's actually more of an athletic department. You're not going to have one coach do football and volleyball. In the same sense, you're not going to have one coach for Rocket League and Overwatch. We need multiple coaches. We need multiple, people working in this facility. It's not something they're familiar with. And so having people who can explain that is often the really big challenge there. And that's why your organization makes so much sense, is we're able to communicate that.
Yeah.
Other thoughts or ideas on that real quick?
I think you kind of covered it. If I can give a little life experience example. A lot of schools are looking for people to start their esports group on campus, their official esports team. I have been looking at a lot of these job postings. A lot of them hire for one game or one coach for multiple games. So we need an esports coach, and we need you to be a pro at League of Legends, Overwatch, and Rocket League, and coach all 3 of those games. If you can do that for us, we'll hire you. It's that's not how it works. And it's not that, I don't necessarily think that it's they're being cheap. I think they just don't understand, I think with the older audience, I think the understanding is if you're good at one video game, you're going to be good at the rest of them. We have other ones that are we need you to run our esports program, but can you also be the director of outdoor recreation? I think the understanding is esports doesn't take as much time as they think it does, so they want you to multitask. They want you to do as much as you can while still running the entire esports program. So it's just basically communicating them that it's a way, way larger scope than what they initially think. And I don't fault them for that. They're trying their best. They genuinely are. It's not that they are trying to stiff the students on their opportunities for esports. It's just education. We are being educated about esports just as much as they're learning.
I think one of the things that I'd like to mention, since Ivy's mentioning the diversification and that's discussed on all these job postings with all of these different expectations to host and run multiple different games, our presidents alone go under an extreme amount of stress just trying to operate their own club. That's one single game. And the expectation is that a coach is going to go in, not only run the program, but also coach 3 different games and keep teams running and do all those other things. And just being a president of a single game is almost a full-time job on its own, right? So to work 3 of those at the same time, either someone would have to be very diligent and very task oriented, or and be an absolute genius, or would be under an enormous amount of stress for that position.
You want to move on to the next one?
Sure. Well, I think, thinking about that, one of the issues that we really kind of worked with is figuring out how the different clubs are going to just kind of get their synergies going and really kind of jive up. And so, I think, the Rocket League team is a really good example of how you've managed to draw some success out of a club. But then, conversely, the League of Legends team was one where it was a little more challenging. So, just talk about those.
So, the League of Legends challenge was actually more of an organizational standpoint. When I had first approached League, Bobcat Esports was going through its very, very early stages with huge growing pains, and as I had mentioned, that very restrictive constitution. And that was what was League of Legends president's main concern was what we had put forth as policy. And we took a step back and said, hey, this doesn't quite make sense. This is way too constrictive. We aren't getting anywhere with this, not at the rate we should be. And we did a retake, reapproached, and had another great discussion after making several other strides with getting some events running, and managed to work out our differences. League of Legends president, who also had that main concern, is now going to be taking over my position actually as our Bobcat Esports president. So that actual discussion has been absolutely excellent in terms of leadership and what we think we should do with the organization. And it brought a completely different mindset and different idea and different opinion and viewing space as to what direction we were headed in, and I couldn't thank him more for that. As for Rocket League and everyone else that have gotten up and running, I think it's been great witnessing and giving them a space. Just giving students a space to feel that they can be with their own people has been one of the biggest things that has come about through Bobcat Esports. Is it's created this environment on campus or even off campus digitally where students come to meet other students and just hang out and make friends and find their people, essentially. When I first came to campus, there was nothing really like it. I was big into FPS games, still am, and now coach our Overwatch team. And none of that was there at the start, and I felt very distanced, and I had just went this complete different direction until I got into the cluster project and said, hey, you know what, I'm going to make this happen, and did so with Ivy and everybody else. And I can't thank them enough for their partnership in this, because this organization wouldn't be where it's at right now without their assistance and their input and everything they've done. So it certainly hasn't been a one-man band, if that's any at all what I've come across, and I would hate to see that. And I can't thank them enough, really, honestly. And that's the thing, though, is this notion of what Bobcat Esports has been a sense of pride almost for every single student that's participated in it. No one's come out of it saying that not that I'm aware of so far, that has participated as an officer who's wanted to make this thing happen, come out of it like, no, I didn't really want to do that, I just took it for the role. Everyone's had this drive, had this passion, had this focus. They want to see this. The students want to see this. We want to be a part of it. And we want to be able to say, hey, we're Bobcats, but we play video games. And that doesn't exactly exist on campus right now other than Bobcat Esports and our associated clubs.
Yeah, and I think, coming from the university perspective again, what we're really looking at, as we've said a few times now, is it's a tale of two cultures in the sense that the university really doesn't see gamers, as I mentioned earlier. And so when we brought this up, it was really, well, how popular are they? And I think one of the statistics I always like to throw out there that really gets the attention of the university, I said, Louis Vuitton is making custom skins for the game League of Legends. And that always prompts two questions. Like, what kind of money is that? And then what is League of Legends? And we get that kind of thing a lot where, it's like, okay, they get Louis Vuitton, they hear that, it's something they recognize. And so if you're talking to your university and thinking about this and putting together some sort of initiative, what are those kind of anchor points? What are things that they are familiar with? And then how do you make that next step into, esports? Just the other day, I fielded a question from a very enthusiastic upper level administrator, and I was asked, how do people Twitch? And I was like, all right, let's talk about how does a person Twitch? And I had to kind of walk through this whole process. What is the monetization? How do people make money? So wait, if someone makes money, so they're getting tipped? Yeah, they're getting tipped. All right, so they're just And what about advertisements? Yeah, they've got advertisements. Who's running those advertisements? Well, State Farm and Doritos and whoever else is interested. And it really kind of opens up their mind in the sense of like bridging that gap between traditional media and kind of the new media of video games. And so, identifying a stakeholder on your campus, whether that's, again, whether it's high school or university, finding someone at the university who is, faculty or administration who understands the language, who's actually familiar with games is often like the big starting point. That was our first level discussion was, we need to have an esports team. Well, why is that important? One of the things I like to talk about with our university is just sheer demographics. One of the challenges that universities as a whole, I'll go ahead and say it that way. Universities as a whole are dealing with here in Ohio is a double-digit decline in enrollment over at least the next 5 years and beyond, simply because there are no more kids. I mean, we're just not having as many kids as we used to. We're seeing dropping enrollment. So you take a declining enrollment and you add that to typically 20 to 22% of university students watch college football, 30 to 35% watch esports. That's something that will get a university's attention, right? One of the other things I like to bring up is, in the past, traditionally, it went student, alumni, donor. And the conversation medium for that is football. Right now down at Ohio University, we're having homecoming. That's what it's all about, bringing the alumni back, making sure that, everyone's kind of having a good time and donating here and there. And we're like, look, this isn't going to be the same conversation in 10 years. When you have kids who don't care about football, how are you going to talk to them, right? Esports is this possible option, but it's a kind of a terrifying step because it's such a cultural unknown for universities. And that's the scary part is, they may want to address students and recognize this is a part of student life, but not knowing absolutely where to begin is really tricky. One of the things that Robert Morris University kind of pointed out when they first got started, they said an esports team's cheaper than a stadium, right? We can't compete athletically. You think about the behemoth of athletic merchandising that is the Ohio State University. Nobody can get that up and running anymore. But you can an esports team for, under $1 million, $50,000. You could have a decent little team going. I often think of Miami University as a great example where they put 6 computers in a library room and home grew their team. And they're a fantastic team right now, but they built it inch by inch by inch. And unfortunately, kind of we're past that point with esports development in universities as a whole, where you just can't sort of inch your way in, but you've got to announce it. Now we're talking, 4,000 square foot facilities at $1 million investment is almost where you have to begin. And in a time of university budget cuts, that's a scary proposition, even with, demographically speaking, that's kind of the way of the future. So these are sort of the things that I grapple with. When I first started this 2 years ago, all I could think about was we're going to play games on campus. This is going to be great. Now all I can think about is HVAC systems and how expensive an HVAC system is. How do you disinfect 90 computers every night? These are the things that kind of keep me up because these are the questions that are really hard to answer. And, being able to kind of explain that to a university, facilities, right? So if we have facilities, that means we have operating costs. Well, then how are we paying for operating costs? Are there sponsorships? How do we find sponsorships? Who sponsors an esports team? If we're going to have games, we're going to need coaches. Are we paying for those coaches? Are they scholarships? Well, what's a good scholarship amount? These are kind of the questions that start to be thought in. Curriculum. Are we going to have a curriculum around esports? Because that'd be great. Well, then who's going to teach an esports class? How do you even teach an esports class? What kind of topics are in esports? There's all these questions. And so kind of the thing that I would really recommend to everyone is, if you're really interested in kind of home growing something on campus, you're asking the university to step into your comfort zone. That means you have to step into theirs. So it's, as I like to joke, there are days we have to brush our teeth and shave and go talk to the upper level administrators and play the game. We have to actually navigate these meetings, have these conversations that may be slower than what we're familiar with. we're going to spend 15 minutes talking about what a twitch is and how someone does it, because we know that the end result is going to be the university is going to be one step closer to realizing what's going on. Like they start to realize just how powerful this is. Yeah.
It seems to me like that's a very big role reversal for like anybody who sits on a school board like that for a college. They went to the football games, they went to the basketball games, and now it seems like your struggle is alienating them.
Yeah.
Saying, like, yeah, that's cute. Anyway, here's how you twitch. They don't, now they feel like the nerd. Like they feel unincluded because they don't know what any of this stuff is. So I'm really like the picture you're painting here is like, it's just a seemingly impossible battle. It's the popularity role reversal thing. It's I guess just more of an observation than a question.
But you're absolutely right, and I think the credit, and I'll shut up here in a second. I spent a year and a half meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting trying to explain this thing. The moment we sat the Bobcat Esports team down in front of the board of trustees, they love hearing from students. So having students who are on their game, can explain this, can do it in a very, kind of charming, polished way, that bought us so much runway to get this thing up and running, was just having, Chris and Ivy and a few others talk to the administrators and to hear directly from the students was fantastic. And so what was that like, talking to the board of trustees?
So it was eye-opening for us as well, because it was a two-way conversation with that, A lot of their questions were very simple, such as like, well, like what's the logistics of this? Like, how does this work? One question that really stuck out to me that I think a lot of people giggled at, but like was a genuine concern for them is like, representation in terms of like, how is the school going to be received that we have an esports team? I think it was Faith Voinovich.
I don't remember that question.
Yeah.
So essentially what one of the trustee members asked was, we have this perception of gamers being individuals in their basement with no social life, not very well kept individuals. Like, how do you guys prove to me that this is not what we're going to be bringing when we are given this to the OU image? And that's what a lot of these schools think too, is some of these upper administration, all they see is they know enough to like know that bad perception that I think gamers get. And the best we can say is like, it's a diverse group. Bobcat Esports is own diverse. I would say I'm a very diverse member of like the administration of Bobcat Esports. It all boils down to like showing them that this is a group that is passionate just as you would with football. The days of thinking of gamers as like individuals in the basements are over. These are people that practice for 20, 30 hours a week on a single game, try and hone in their skill, are sacrificing things in their life to get really, really good at this growing industry. And it's a case of showing, they put in just as much time as your football players. They're spending just as much money. They're really, really passionate about this. These are students that are going to give the school everything to represent the name. That's what I kind of told her, like, when you're bringing this team on, you're bringing on a group of like 6, 12 passionate players who are going to work as hard as they can to represent the OU name.
Yeah, and there's difficulties there, thinking about Counter-Strike. You win in Counter-Strike and up on the screen, terrorists win, Ohio University. That's an optics problem. And as gamers, we're like, it's Counter-Strike, it's all good. And the university's like, we don't want terrorists win in Ohio University up on the screen, and navigating that and understanding when to kind of step back and when to kind of step forward. Hearthstone, Overwatch until this weekend were pretty safe bets. Rocket League, safe bet. Counter-Strike, a little more tricky. So B-roll, pick the games you really want to advocate for to get your foot in the door, and decide which games may have to kind of wait until the university's a little more comfortable with the whole nature of it. That's another kind of piece of advice.
No, we have a small but mighty group. We only have a little bit of time left. Did anybody have any thoughts they want to give? This is a roundtable discussion, so if you guys just want to even have thoughts, that's okay.
Do you guys get any support from the developers?
So it's a great question, and to date, we actually haven't had any direct discussions with any developers in terms of getting us support to navigate these conversations. We do have administrators who are advisors through TESPA and some other collegiate organizations that come in and say, hey, these are the things that we discuss, and we can point conversations to those people who can best convey that conversation to whoever they're speaking with. But for the most part, it's been through us really to bring this conversation to the table.
It's hard because we are on the smaller side of growing esport teams, especially because we don't fully have. OU has recognized us and they're working as hard as they can to get our official program started, but we are not official yet. We are not to the extent of OSU or Kent. So it's hard to reach out to developers and be like, hey, could we have some assistance when we aren't necessarily what the level of establishment is that they want to see. They do support us to an extent. I know the League of Legends Club does have contact with Riot at times. Riot will send them like swag and like merchandise and stuff in return for being a club that actively pushes League of Legends. As far as like helping with communication, it's all on us.
And that's another big question is getting a governing body big enough that the publishers would want to have that conversation. When you start offering up a scholarship, if we're going to give someone a 4-year scholarship to play, Rocket League, we have to make sure Psyonix is willing to support that game for at least that long. So what happens when, a university puts out a scholarship and then the publisher decides that game is going out? Heroes of the Storm. I mean, look at the situation it was in. When Activision started really choking Blizzard, that was one of the first things to go. And so what do you do there, right? Unfortunately, there's no kind of governing body yet that really kind of has that clout. And so who that's going to be, that's the big mystery question. Yeah.
I think one of our biggest conversation points with the university as far as approaching, our success as an organization and what this means is we've actually had students come out of our organization and now go and work for professional teams and professional organizations within the industry. Lamar Daniels is now director of Lourdes University for their esports program. Sydney is now a graphic designer, or I think the graphic designer for the Washington Justice. Our friend Matthew has now become the social media coordinator for Boston Uprising. These are all students that just came out of an esports group. We don't have a program. There's nothing like that at OU. But we have an esports group, and they went into the industry out of it. So I think for us, it's one of our big talking points, is that there's possibility for lives and jobs in video games.
And the more you can make your university aware of that, the sooner they're going to buy in. When they see that this is an opportunity for students to grow in the future and job opportunities, job placement, future alumni contacts, that's what they really respond to. So kind of keep pushing that. As much data as you can gather is where you want to be.
A fun fact, our time is up, but a fun fact is Adam Apicella. The guy who started MLG came from OU. And, that was way before Bobcat Esports. But, I think MLG is a widely recognized name. And that was something that came from OU. It was there even before Bobcat Esports.
Chris Puckett also was from OU. So we've got a little history in it. But nothing's at OU yet. So, right. Knock on wood. But thank you all for participating in this conversation.
We'll be...
Thanks. Thanks, Mom. No,
we'll be here for a hot second if you want to come and talk to us more. And if you want your contact info, please feel free to reach out.
Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.